You're all awake. This is a surprise for us, actually.
What's the date today? Is it Monday?
Today appears to be Sunday. I'm not a very reliable source, though. So, did you guys have a good time at the party last night? Okay, that's good. That's good. So today we got a lot more stuff for you. If you're in the Capture the Flag or deobfuscation contests, those are both going on. The schedule says they end at 2 p.m., but I think we might extend those until 4 p.m. or so. So just ask about it in the contest.
Point, nothing happens. It doesn't open, and that's phenomenal. She then gets caught by the killer, who turns out to be her lover, and she stands defiant as he makes it clear that though he loves her, he will murder her, and she speaks truth right to his damn face anyway. All of this is mostly to say that Murder, She Wrote was a much better show than you remember, and you should give it another chance. But this is also an illustration of a couple of my favorite things about lockpicking in film, television, books, games, etc. That it can be a real tension driver. It can actually contribute to the story of what's happening. One of the easiest ways to get things right when you're picking locks is to have it fail. Because think about all the times you've tried to pick a lock. If you figure out the odds, more often it probably hasn't worked. And that can be great for a story. You can get caught by your ex-lover murderer, which could be parsed incorrectly, but you know what I mean. So, I'm Schuyler Towne. I've been thinking about all of this sort of stuff for quite a while. I've been picking locks for about 8 years, and I started thinking about lock picking in film and television, and then eventually sort of lock and lock picking's role in society as a whole, and then a bunch of stuff about security technology, and on and on and on and on. If you add a .com to the end of my name, you can actually find out about some of my research projects. So this, what we're talking about today, lockpicking in popular media, is one of the big three that I'm trying to tackle for this year. The other two are redefining the origin of the lock, proposing a new theory for how the lock entered the world in the first place. The research is done, so I'm just trying to put that together and get it published. And then the Yale and Towne collection is an incredible collection of locks, maybe the most important collection of the locks ever assembled, that was held by the Yale and Towne Company and thrown away in the late 50s. Thankfully, 2/3 of it went into private hands, 1/3 of it went into public hands, and one of the previous thirds was recently donated to a museum that I'm working with. So we're tracking that down, telling the story of that. But those two research projects are what we would call loss leaders in the retail trade. Those cost me a lot of money, and I'm not getting paid to do them. However, if I can get somebody in film and television to hire me to tell them all sorts of cool things about locks, maybe I could fund the other projects. So I've been thinking about this in depth lately. Here are some of the reasons. I'm sick of just yelling about this on Twitter. I'm sick of tweeting things to different shows. That's really ineffective, and it's just me complaining, and it's never productive. It's never productive. It's just me being a dick. Additionally, I think that I actually have some legitimate insight into how to communicate the ideas of lockpicking and some of the storytelling elements in film, television, etc. My only formal education after high school was at a theater conservatory. I was in film and television for a while, a lot of stage stuff, and so you can't just roll in and say, get it right! You have to roll in and say, here are some strategies to make it look correct that don't break your budget and still allow your actors to work with it, blah, blah, blah. So I think that I can actually genuinely translate these ideas to that audience very well. And finally, this is very genuine, I believe that portrayals of security in film, TV, books, etc. have a deleterious effect on security in our culture. At the very least, of security perception in our culture. So, it all started with Dexter. I was watching Dexter at the recommendation of a lot of people. I was just watching it on Netflix. I was a couple seasons late to the party. And by the second episode, I was already tweeting at the producers. So this is right from the opening credits, and there's a couple of things wrong with this, but the most important thing that I think is wrong with it, that if you're gonna go with, kind of brand X lock, the Defiant that's on his door, why wouldn't you go with a Dexter lock for Dexter? Come on, it's a brand. Anyway. Yes, exactly. So also, just look at the bidding on that key. That incredibly flat bidding. This is going to come up again in a second, but that's a shitty, just all around terrible lock. Okay, so here are just a few of the things that I noticed about Dexter before I actually stopped watching it because I was going crazy. This is really important because this sets the stage for the reason that it upset me for the rest of the thing. A lot of the time when you see people doing dumb things with locks in film and television, they're not supposed to be experts. But Dexter, particularly throughout the first season, is always like picking locks and talking locks and acting like he knows all sorts of crap about locks. The basic premise is that he's a pretty good lock picker. He's far from a master lock picker, but he knows his way around stuff. He knows what sort of locks he should be choosing. And so, at one point in time, he needs to pick into the evidence locker, and when he rolls in, he realizes it's two shitty deadbolts on top of one another, and that is way beyond his skill level right now. So I went crazy. I went crazy when I heard that. Anyway, and this is a terrible spoiler, but yeah. The ice truck killer, who I think was the main killer in the first season or whatever, I think it turns out to be his brother or something like that. Yeah, thank you. Picks his way into Dexter's house and finds his little slides with blood on them or whatever. And Dexter is stunned that this man was able to pick into his house. I think that was literally the episode I stopped watching on. Anyway. So, I just never stopped being angry. A few months later, though, as I began watching other shows and realized that it's just everywhere, and somehow I just hadn't really been paying attention until Dexter kind of jarred my brain about it, I just started keeping a list. This is my Criminal Minds Lock Slipups.txt. And you can see Criminal Minds, Burn Notice, there's MI5 and a bunch of other people. And so I started keeping this list myself and had a bunch of different text files on a bunch of different computers. Anytime that I was watching something, I would take note of what was going on. Eventually I realized that I could crowdsource this a little bit, so I just started a Google survey that if you would like to, you can bookmark. So anytime you are streaming something and you see something happening with locks, accurate or inaccurate, you can record it for me. It is at lock.gd/n. Lock.gd is just my URL shortener. And we've had many fine contributions to the survey. So thank you all. I look forward to more such fine contributions. Okay, so here are some things that you can look out for, just right off the bat. If it's a pin tumbler lock, do they have two tools? Do they have the tension wrench and the pick? Very frequently, they do not. If you want to go a step further, no matter how many tools they have, does the plug turn? Does the lock operate with the picks the same way you would expect the lock to operate with the key. And this is going to start driving you nuts now that I'm drawing attention to it. But anytime you see a lock picked on television, film, etc., just think about how the lock would have behaved if you had opened it with a key. The plug would have rotated, a bolt would have moved, something would have happened. You wouldn't have just jammed a couple of picks in, removed them, and then opened the door. This isn't going to be a good talk, because I'm just going to keep getting myself mad and gracing. And finally, does it just seem like magic? There are a couple of terrible examples of this. A lot of the time, somebody will just walk up to something, put some random tool into it, take it out, and then the door opens. So if it doesn't seem like there's any mechanical way in which this could have been successful, it probably wasn't. All right, so there are good examples, there are bad examples, there are ugly examples, to borrow from the classic film. Burn notice when they're focusing on a lock, when they're using a lock for one of their like cutaway deep explanations of a concept, they actually do a nice job. They also have some of the worst lock lingo of any show that you will ever watch. Just the most ridiculous terms that you've ever heard that have nothing to do with locks when they're talking about them, but when they're focused on them, they do a good job. In particular, the episode where they deal with bumping was excellent. So, what's the main character's name? Michael walks into this facility that he needs to have deeper access to. He manages to borrow a key for the bathroom from the secretary of some woman that he needs to, bring to justice. So, he gets the bathroom key, and this is great, because by getting the bathroom key, he now has the keyway that he needs. He knows what key he needs to build his bump key off of. So this is just clever on the face of it, and the right way to go about this. When he gets this key, there are several things that he could have done, but he just walks out of the building with it, because why not? He then goes through the whole process of explaining, with slightly silly language, but still fairly accurate, the process of making a bump key. But this moment here, on screen, is phenomenal, especially because it never comes up in the narration. They're just getting it right. So what you see here is the key that he took for the bathroom, stacked on top of a blank key. He is then marking the spacing with a Sharpie so that he gets the spacing exactly right when he hand files this key. And even just when people are telling you about bumping, that doesn't even really come up much, and it doesn't come up in the narration, but that is such an important step, because if your spacing is off, you don't interact with every pin at the same time, and in bumping it is essential that you collide with every pin at once. So the spacing is super important, and they're just sitting here silently on camera getting it right, and that made me so happy. And then, they go through a test run of it with a little lock board that he's built himself. And finally, it, of course, works on the door itself. And you can see he's even using a bump hammer here. And additionally, in his workshop, I should have grabbed a frame of this. When he does the test, he uses the heel of a nice shoe, which is something that a lot of people in Locksport will tell you can use as a bump hammer. So it's just really nice the whole way around. Somebody really did their research, and they made sure that not just in the script, but in the shooting of it, in the framing of it, in the editing of it, they got everything that was important. And it was just beautifully done. Okay, so the bad. MI5 is a great show. It's called Spooks when it was over in England. I actually like it a lot, especially because they are just completely cavalier about killing off people that you love, which is a great quality in a show. However, they frequently resort to magic, as is the case with their really cool steampunk-looking electric pick gun. So the guy slides the needle in below the lowest ward, so it's not actually interacting with any pins, gets it nice and flush in that same position, puts his thumb on what the frame before just looks like, well, I don't know, anyway, just puts his thumb down, and you just wait a minute, and you hear a little like, and then you hear the most ridiculous sound of a lock being violently opened by a key, of a bolt being thrown very, very hard, but the plug never turns. He just pulls the thing out. He doesn't even turn a knob in the end. He just puts his shoulder into the door and pushes it open. So it's pure magic. They are constantly, they're constantly picking lever locks with pin tumbler tools, just jamming a couple of like half diamonds in a lever lock, and then again like shouldering a door open. Like doors don't even work correctly. It's not just, sorry. So, and then just the very bad. So Monk, I wrote about this. I write about some of this stuff sometimes at tvpicking.quora.com, which I probably should have put up somewhere. But I wrote one about Mr. Monk ruining my night. So he and his cohorts get trapped inside of a vault at a local bank. He had gone there because the place had been robbed, and he was very concerned because in his safe deposit box at this bank was the last piece of jewelry that he had from his dead, murdered wife, this diamond bracelet. He cared a lot about it, so he wanted to contribute his services. Of course, he and his goony friends get trapped inside of the vault, and hilarity ensues. They end up being in there for, I think, in the timeline of the episode, about 2 days. All because of this lock. So, this lock was on what looks from the outside like a breaker panel that they think might have some sort of emergency phone in it or something, or some means of communicating with the outside world. So, they spend 2 days shooting at it, staring at it, and then just flopping around in desperation because there's no way to open the super high security lock. Now, so enraged was I that I went out and purchased one of these like this exact one, so that I could then sit there while watching the episode again, just trying every combination. Now, I'll admit that I didn't get it done before the end of the episode, but I got through every possible combination in 2.5 hours, which wasn't even super fast on my part, but they were in there for 2 days. And here's the horrible part. Here's the part that's really tragic. A lot of the thrust of Monk is him trying to let go of his horribly murdered wife that he's on a life quest to like avenge and find the killer of. So I feel like you shouldn't tell that guy to let that go. Just, that's great. Kill that man. Anyway, they use her diamond bracelet to saw through it. Works great. And isn't tragic and horrific and really sad at all. So that was terrible. Somehow I watched all of Monk anyway, though. All right, so why does any of this matter? Okay, so I'm just showing you examples and complaining and talking about how you can do things good and how you can do things bad. Fine. But as I've said in the program, I want to go a little bit beyond that. I actually think that this does matter. I really do believe that this contributes to security thinking as a whole. In an episode of The Closer, which is another show that I actually like quite a bit, Brenda Lee Johnson is picking into some door, like she frequently is. She usually has both tools, correct, which is great. I'm actually okay with most of their picking in this show the few times that it's come up. What I am not okay with whatsoever, though, is that in this episode, I believe it was the second episode of the 6th season, she picks into this door. And then later in the same episode, when investigating a crime scene, says, so, she had just picked a lock, then went to some sort of murder scene and said, well, no signs of forced entry, no other possibility but that they knew their attacker. Which is effed up. And here's the thing, right? This really does permeate. This idea that nobody picks locks for crime completely permeates. People in this room, many of you, have probably thought this yourself. The fact is, in America, we don't investigate the lock. We don't look for tool mark analysis. So many cops know how to pick locks, none of them bring the locks to their forensic departments to have a look at. Friendly with Mass State Troopers in the forensics lab for many, many years. In his many, many years, he was never once brought a lock to investigate. Never once. We just don't do it. And when we have on TV, in every friggin' procedural, someone saying, oh, no signs of forced entry, must have known the attacker, which you hear constantly when every procedural that gets into the ridiculous nitty-gritty forensics and forensic bullshit of various biological forensics and every other thing, when have you ever seen a lock analyzed on a procedural crime show? And therefore, we, as a culture, can't imagine that this would happen. The number of forensics techs who can tell a story about, I was involved in some sort of crime scene, and the person was like, well, can't you just CSI this because of the nature of the crime? Nobody says that about locks. When their place is broken into, they don't say, oh, can't you just run my lock down to your crime lab and investigate it? Because they don't know that lock forensics is possible. Well, this handsome gentleman will tell you that it most definitely is possible. If you don't know, Datagram runs lockpickingforensics.com, and it's a phenomenal site, and he does amazing work providing open information about tool mark analysis related to locks. So, throughout all of my complaining over many years, I actually started to have some opportunities to interact with media, people producing media of various forms. My very first introduction to it was at the Sisters in Crime Conference, which is this phenomenal collection of female crime novelists, and they have some brothers in crime too, but it's mostly women crime novelists who get together in New England every year for their crime bake. And I got to go there to talk to them actually about forensics based entirely on Datagram's work. And the way that it was structured was that I would explain an entry concept, and then we would cover the forensics left behind by that entry. And this group of people were enthralled with this and hadn't really been exposed to the idea of tool mark analysis of locks before. And then afterwards, I had phenomenal conversations with many of the authors, and I've now had the opportunity to consult on a small handful of very well-received books. So this was the first time that I had the opportunity to inject some sense into any sort of media, and it was incredibly exciting. Not long after this, by chance again, I wound up on a TV show on the History Channel, picking some locks for them and talking to them about locks, and I spent 4 days on set with them, acquiring, prepping, consulting, preparing safes and pin tumbler locks. It's a show called Sliced. It isn't on the air. It isn't on the air. But the whole idea was they cut things apart and looked inside of them, which was kind of a cool idea. But it was mostly a show about their incredible cutting tools provided by their sponsor Husqvarna, and they were crazy, like amazing saws. So they would slice a safe in half and say, oh, look at this thing, look at this thing, look at this thing. I think that's how it works. So I was the guy in the back prepping all of the things to be cut, pinning up the locks appropriately so that they would open when they needed to, and doing all of this staging. And this was my first introduction to the idea that we could get things right by staging them properly ahead of time, by explaining the core concepts to the camera crew and the producers. And I didn't do a great job of it, but I spent a ton of time with them completely for free. And then in the end, here's the animation they provided for a Medico lock. Okay, I know that this clearly isn't an animation, but just a still from it, and I'm going to talk you through it a little bit. All right, so here is roughly our shear line, okay? This is what they're calling the unlocked position for several of these pins, where the key pin is still clearly blocking the shear line, so that's impossible. Every single driver pin in this lock is a mushroom pin, which would add a ton of slop to the lock. You need at least one fairly solid or at least serrated pin in order not to completely F it up. Additionally, the pins are being set into their proper position while the key is still being inserted. The way that they animated this was, as soon as the key enters the lock to the first position, the first pin is set and never moves again, which isn't how locks or keys work. And then the second one, and so on and so forth. And anyway, it was just horrible. And I spent half a day with their animators working through this stuff. And this was still what went to print, which is very frustrating. I was actually teaching a class at Olin College for a semester a while back, and I used this animation, another animation they put together, as a test for the class so they could pick it apart for me. It worked very well for that. I recently did another thing for NatGeo that I think might be a lot better. We'll see. And I also, along the way, had the opportunity to speak to a lot of game designers, which was very exciting. I don't have a ton on this right now, but my main headline, this is a game design group out of Ohio. They were making a game called Cracked, all about safe cracking and picking locks in a high school setting. Really fun, great art, great group of people. Did a long workshop with them, just, again, for free, because I wanted more of this stuff to be out there in the world and be getting right. My main headline about games, I don't have a ton more on this and the rest of the talk, but my main headline line is, whether or not there's a lot of accuracy built in, they are missing so many incredible game mechanics. If any of you have picked locks in any sort of competition setting, if you've seen what Deviant Ollam has done with his incredibly like fan-friendly Gringo Warrior, or he's got another one now I don't remember the name of. What was it? Black Bag, yeah. Just incredible events that bring in all sorts of different mechanisms and different methods of entry that are being completely overlooked by the game industry. And these could be great things. I mean, just for a very quick example, most of you probably know soda can shimming, beer can shimming. You cut a small shape out of a soda can, and you can, just like credit carding a door, you can slip a latch back on a padlock. Imagine if you were in a game and you literally had to find a soda can and you just had to make a fairly accurate shape, and then it helped you out with the mechanics of sliding it in. But literally just these like little puzzle piece situations to get through something. There's so much thinking in the style of a video game for a lockpicker already, especially when you come to the DIY non-destructive entry stuff, that is being completely overlooked by video games right now, and I think could be awesome. Okay. But one of the big things that I realized as I got to contribute a little bit to TV, a lot to books, and here or there with game design stuff, was that these moments in popular media when a lock or lockpicking gets deeply involved can actually genuinely contribute to the stories being told. A couple of great examples of that. So, Sneakers, phenomenal movie. My favorite scene in Sneakers, even before I learned how to pick a lock, was when Robert Redford is walking up to the door of the name of the company. Yeah. Thank you. So he's walking up, and he actually pulls out appropriate tools. They're lockpicks. And you see this look on his face when he sees it, and it turns out that in front of him is a keypad lock. Digital lock now. His picks aren't going to work. And so he in his earpiece is talking to Mothers back in the van, Dan Aykroyd, doing an amazing job. And he's like, it's a keypad lock. He gives him whatever information he can. And Mothers just like tearing through manuals, like ripping, like going crazy, trying to find some bit of information that he can offer to help him get through this lock in the immediate. And then they go back and forth. You see Robert Redford going, okay, all right. Okay, well, we could try that. All right. That's worth a shot. I don't have the last frame. He kicks the door in. Oh, that was the worst. But he kicks the door in. And it's amazing. And this whole situation, it isn't just this great little comedic moment. It's demonstrating the nature of rapid change in pen testing, of having somebody in the van or on the phone or whatever. I, once in my life, thanks to Datagram and JK, got to be the guy on the other end of the phone. And I got to pretend that I was Mother and contribute almost nothing to what they were doing. But it was still a lot of fun. And it's just this, it's a phenomenal moment that speaks to so much more than the little bit of comedy that is drawn out of it. And I saw so many of you, as soon as you saw Robert Redford with the pick going, oh, this scene. Yeah, and it's great. It's a great bit of story. So, another one of my favorites, and this sort of goes back to the Jessica Fletcher model, is in the show Rescue Me, which is another great show. This guy, whose name I don't remember right now, trying to get into his ex-wife's house, I think to retrieve a watch that belonged to his father, or something to this effect. Just needs to get something out of the house. He no longer has a key to it. However, he does have some lockpicks. And just his manner with the lockpicks to begin with make it very clear that this is very new to him. This is all done in silence. But he just like opens this thing. He doesn't really know what's going on inside of it. But he takes out a couple of tools and he starts going to work on the lock. And nothing happens. And then when he pulls his hands away, for those of you who pick locks or know anything about them, there's this wonderful little moment for you where you realize he's been working on a lever lock the whole time. But unlike MI5, it's not successful. He still gets in. Oh, wait, no, he doesn't. And as he's standing there bleeding, having just broken the glass, he looks around, realizes he's in broad daylight, and there are people not too far away. He's on the side of the house, but still, this is like a suburban neighborhood. And he walks off. And in subsequent scenes, his hand is bandaged. He's demoralized. Like the fact that this window has been broken comes back in the like. This is just such a good, and it's all in silence. But it is such an impactful moment in this character's whole arc. This interaction with this lock. It's beautiful. It doesn't just have to be Eddie Murphy standing at the gate in Rush Hour 2, Beverly Hills Cop 2, popping the lock open while he's yapping to somebody. That was a terrible throwaway scene and horrible lockpicking. All right. Have any of you read the Great Brain books? I know it's a little hard to read stuff on the bottom of the screen, so this is The Great Brain at the Academy. The Great Brain at the Academy is a great book. The Great Brain books in general were a great book. And years after I learned how to pick, I suddenly had a memory that I'm pretty sure that the Great Brain did something crazy with locks at one point in time. And I couldn't quite remember what it was, but I managed to find a digital copy of this. And what he carries out is this incredible wax pad attack. And I, in my life, have been dreaming of carrying out a wax pad attack. Don't worry, I'll explain it. For many, many years. I, in fact, have written some entirely ridiculous lock fiction in which a skinnier, more handsome version of myself manages to open some chest once owned by Louis the 15th was the locksmith? 16th? 16th. I think 16th was the locksmith by carrying out a wax pad attack on it. It's terrible. You can find it on the internet. Okay, here's what's happening. This was set in the late 1800s in a boys' boarding school where the Great Brain has been stuck. They use warded keys and locks throughout the place, which is very reasonable. So what he does is he manages through this amazing, elaborate heist scene with his 11-year-old buddies. They distract a priest. They stage people at each of the corners. They really carefully go through the zones of this place until they can get the keys, block that door for a little bit. He goes into the bathroom, gets a bar of soap, and makes an impression of the key, which is pretty cool to begin with. They then return the key, get it back on the thing, get the soap off it, get it back on the thing, and now he's got his bar of soap, which he hides underneath the statue. Next day, this is like a 3-day process. Next day, he goes back to the statue when there's nobody around, he gets the bar of soap, he goes out into the yard during some sort of free period, sits on the far side of a tree while a couple of his friends sit at the base of the tree, having a conversation with him as normal, as he whittles from a piece of wood a key that matches the impression in the bar of soap that he has. He's whittling, and he's talking about the fact that he's actually a pretty proficient whittler, but this particular lock has relatively intricate wards, and he's having a difficult time with the middle bits. So he does his best to reproduce the impression. All right, so this is what's called a box of wards. These are actually photographs from that Yale and Towne collection that I'm working on. So this is a box of wards. You can see these metal protrusions throughout. And all that's happening in a warded lock is that inside of the lock you'll have these protrusions that correspond directly to the negative spaces in the key. So this is the key in the lock. You can see the same pattern cut into the key, and then you can see the wards actually coming through the key there. So he's done his best to reproduce his warded key out of the piece of wood. They then carry out another elaborate heist scene, working on a not easy to see lock in an area where they can try out their key without worry of discovery for the most part, but they still keep up people watching. He tries the key in the lock and it doesn't work. He's not at all shocked by this. He was detailing it to us previously. And this again is day 3 now. So what he does is he coats the face of his almost finished key with a layer of wax. He allows it to dry, he smooths it with his knife, he inserts it back into the lock, turns again, pulls it out as soon as it stops, and now he can see marked in the wax the area that he hadn't yet removed with his knife. He proceeds to remove that area, coats it with wax again, inserts it, turns, stops one more time, finds another ward a little further into the lock, because though this warding system is uniform, often you'll see them placed in different areas of the interior of the box of wards. Goes through, cuts out that place, clears the wax off, and the key works perfectly. Now there's a key that always works in that lock. And this is a book aimed at middle schoolers. And this is several days. And the whole idea with the Great Brain is that You're showing children these tiny acts of genius from a child, which is incredibly empowering, and particularly when it comes to mechanical locks and the warded keys that a lot of people, well, especially children, would have been aware of at the time that this was being written. This is awesome. It demonstrates the credibility of the main character, and it gives another sort of notch in the belt of, this is why he's called the Great Brain. This is why you love reading this. This is why it's exciting. This stuck with me, having read it when I was probably 10, and came back up in a memory for me when I was learning about locks much later in my life. All right, so there are many different ways that you can get this right. Number one, you could just learn how to pick. And this has happened very rarely, but the examples of it are awesome, where an actor or an actress or a director has just said, we're going to learn to pick. Werner Herzog, the phenomenal documentarian, in the film camp that he runs, when he's teaching people all of the skills to be a filmmaker, teaches people to pick locks. All right. Also, camera angles. Doing camera angles appropriately can lead to great result. We'll show a nice example of that. You can also prep the locks, as I was trying to do for the folks at Sliced, and there are... Burn Notice sort of does this in a nice way, but you can go a lot further with it. And this, I think, is the big area where people are really lacking, is that you can really prep locks to carry out a great effect. And finally, just using the right words and phrases. The language of locks and lockpicking is so horrible in most popular media. All right, so in Terminator 2 Judgment Day, Linda Hamilton insisted that if they were going to pick locks, she was going to do it for real. So, if you go back and watch Terminator 2 Judgment Day, when she's getting out of her restraints, she actually gets out of her restraints. And they just give her the amount of time on film, keeping it rolling, to make that happen. And certainly she had practiced, but so would her character have. So she knew what to do, she creates a tool for herself to pick her way out of her restraints, and she does it legitimately. It actually happened on set, and that's awesome. Robot and Frank is a great movie. This was recommended to me by Lizzie from 303. I think many of you probably at least know of him. Phenomenal picker. He recommended it to me with a little hesitation. He said, "It's a great film, terrible lockpicking." And it really is. They start right off with the classic picking a lever lock with pin tumbler tools, like literally the very first scene. And it just kind of stays horrible throughout. He's teaching a robot how to pick locks, though, so just for novelty alone, it's a lot of fun. Because he's a cat burglar, and this robot that's supposed to take care of him becomes his cat burglar assistant. And it's a beautiful movie. But at one point, they do something that completely redeemed it for me and made me so happy. There's a scene, one of the first ones, where he's teaching the robot how to pick, where he's talking through it, he has both hands up there as you would. The lock is mounted on a vise, and we are looking at the back of the lock. Frank's in frame, robot's in frame, he's giving this great speech, and on the important line, and this has happened to me twice in my life of teaching people to pick locks, where I'll say the thing they need to know about picking, and then it'll slide right open, and it's the most amazing feeling in the world. But on that most important line, with the fundamental of picking a lock, you will see the back of the plug actually rotate. Because the entire time he's sitting there, he's just doing this, holding onto a key. And then when he needs to, he turns the key. But from the back, it looks like he picked it and everything that he was doing. And it's great. I don't need every actor to be a Linda Hamilton. I just need it to be staged correctly, that the right things happen. And this was a great little scene. And it's a great movie. Robot and Frank. You should Netflix it. And finally, we're going to go back to that Dexter bumping episode. The key works on the first bump, and it all looks perfect. And then I went frame by frame by frame to watch as he began to put the key in the lock. This, I know it's very hard to see, but I'm sort of tracing the peaks for you right here. This is not a bump key. This is just the correct key for the lock. And that's great. That's perfect. Again, I obviously tweeted this. But I'm one of the few nerds that would take the time to try to figure this out. And this is just a beautiful way to do it and make it all look and behave entirely legitimately. Now, if they'd wanted to go a step further, they could have still used a bump key and then rekeyed their lock just to match a bump key, which would have been extra badass. But, I'm still very happy with this. Okay, and finally the lingo. So I'm going to show you a couple of example phrases. 6-pin locks on the entrance door. That seems totally fine, right? Except that the context of this was the people at Criminal Minds were trying to describe to the police why this guy was a security nut job. Yeah. Those friggin' 6-pin locks, man, on his entrance doors. Jesus. Most of you probably have 6-pin locks on your doors, maybe 5-pin. Anyway, here's another one. Seems entirely reasonable. Feel the click of the pins while he was working on a safe. I like the race to get that out back there. And finally, so this is actually a pretty good book. Like, it's a really good storytelling. People have been recommending it to me forever. The Lock Artist by Steve Hamilton. People have been recommending it to me forever because it seemed like very realistic descriptions of safe cracking and lockpicking and so on and so forth. And there are a lot of nuggets of truth in there, but the very first page in the book, the very brief introduction and acknowledgement to the locksmith that Steve Hamilton worked with as he was working on the book, says outright, things are close enough to be good for storytelling, but not so close that this could be used as a manual, because they were concerned about that. And therefore, as you go along, there are a lot of jarring wait, that makes no sense, and completely takes a nerd like me that should love this book completely out of the moment. And I don't need an exhaustive description of how you carry this thing out. Outside of something like The Great Brain, where the joy of it is exhaustive descriptions, you don't actually want that. You want some technical aptitude, and you want appropriate terminology, and I think that that's plenty for storytelling. But there was a lot of clearly intentional wonkiness here or there that just completely took me out of the moment. So to this end, as I was saying, my other research projects, I lose money on. The Yale and Towne thing, I'm going back and forth between Chicago and Connecticut regularly, where the 2/3 that are held in public are right now. Spend my time there, blow my money on that, because I am desperate to see these things brought back together and re-exhibited someday. So my hope is that through projects like this, by putting together a genuine and comprehensive guide to how to properly handle locks and entry and all sorts of fun DIY things that can be incorporated, putting together sample dialogue that makes sense and is to the point and flows in with the characters you're working with, et cetera, being able to put that sort of guide together, I think would be a genuine asset to people in the media community. And to that end, I am teaming up with a master yo-yoist who kept winning to the point that I believe he created the trifecta of yo-yo championships, something like that. But I feel bad, because anytime I'm working with somebody that's trying to bust out my credentials, they get stuff wrong. So I'm sure that I'm getting this wrong. But anyway, he's amazing at yo-yos. And he hates when yo-yos are used incorrectly in films. So we and a beekeeper, who's really good at bees, and a crypto person who's really good at communicating cryptography via film and television, are getting together to provide technical advisement services. And who knows, maybe nobody will ever hire us, but man, it would be pretty slick. So, that is pretty much my talk. I'll take some questions or whatever. I have no idea how I'm doing on time, but I have a little postscript here, which is to say, Angela Lansbury was a bombshell. Oh my God, you guys. And she was a lot of fun, too. I'm just like, if you have the chance to go back and watch a picture of Dorian Gray in black and white, she stars in it, and she's phenomenal. She's an incredible singer, an incredible actress, and just stunning in everything she's ever done. So, go watch Murder, She Wrote, go watch a picture of Dorian Gray, and leave this talk with a better respect for Angela Lansbury, please. Thank you. Thank you. How are we doing on time? 20 minutes? Excellent. I have a postscript as well. But before we do that, I'd love to take some questions if anybody has any. I don't have any immediate news of Angela Lansbury, though I hear that there are talks about a reboot of Murder, She Wrote with a new actress, which is interesting. It's very interesting. Yes.
Your story about the kids book.
Yes.
Reminded me of Dr. Sin, Elias the Scarecrow.
Never heard of it.
It's an old Disney film. It was like Revolutionary War times.
Really?
And he did something similar to make a key.
Awesome. Could you please do? Yeah, that would be fantastic. Thank you very much. Yes.
Do you think that in some cases the media is intentionally getting it wrong because of some rationalization that they don't want to teach people how to do this?
That is a very good question. The question was, do I think that occasionally the media are intentionally getting it wrong so as not to introduce anybody to these concepts or teach them how to accomplish this? I think that is occasionally certainly the case, and it's clearly the case in The Lock Artist. And again, this is a book where anybody that doesn't have the like pure mechanical knowledge of locks, you would read through it and it would be phenomenal and you would really love it. It really only takes, I think, experts out of the moment as you're reading through it. And so if you're going to do that, I think they do a nice job of it. I do think that occasionally happens, but based on the, well, it's amassing quickly, but based on the anecdotal evidence I have from my own watching of stuff and from all of the people that have contributed to now 3 years of data on what they've been watching when I'm able to watch those clips, it has to be ignorance. Like, the majority of it has to be ignorance, because it's not changing things so as not to teach anyone. It is just like barefaced ignorance or laziness the majority of the time. That said, I do think that there are at least a handful of people that very considered do it without the deeper explanations. And in fact, that may be why not all of the very clever things they were doing on camera made it into the narration of Burn Notice. I wouldn't be shocked by that. Anyone else? Yes?
They might have filmed it right, but who knows what happened in the cutting room?
That's a very good point. Yeah, they may have filmed it correctly, and then in the cutting room, just for pacing or whatever other reason, we lost some of the additional narration. All right, postscript? I'm so sorry, you guys, but I'm about to say bad things about MacGyver. I want to preface this by saying that when I finally sat down to watch the episode of MacGyver, that, as a lock person, had been recommended to me at every conference I had gone to by super enthusiastic conference attendees, I loved it. I thought it was a great episode. I thought it was a lot of fun. There's like a drug-addicted professor's son who's been neglected and ends up almost killing himself on a pile of plutonium, which is great. This is the Hell Week episode where the various physics students have to assemble barricades on their doors. And by assembling those barricades, they are trying to keep out their fellow physics students. They then are timed in their ability to enter that student's room. So, this fellow right here, I think he might be the disaffected youth. And this smarmy looking fellow back here is the smarmy youth. And he has a lot of amazing smarmy faces. I assume that was the entire casting call. They were just like, look like you're a little better than me and I just said something dumb. And oh, this is our friggin' guy. He's so good at that. Anyway, so this guy, his barricade, he has assembled, I don't remember the exact number, but like 15, 20 locks on his door, all deadbolts. And they all have the keys in them. I know that's difficult to see, but they actually all have the keys in them already. But what he has done is he has locked some, and he has unlocked others. So that, as you go through and try to like unlock, oh, and he has affected the handedness of them. So that if you turn counterclockwise on some, it will lock it. If you turn clockwise on some, it will lock it. So that you can't just turn them all out. And so this is his barricade. It's, you know, try as much as you like. You have all of the keys, good luck. But just from the pattern, it'll be difficult to discern. Now, there are a couple of things that I want to say at the outset. If I were approaching this problem, there are a few things that I would do. Number one, in additional inspection, the plate here on the door isn't like perfectly flush or overlapping. So with a piece of paper, I think that you could go through and pretty quickly determine where all of the bolts are. Number one. And it might be overlapping a little. I've looked at it kind of close, not great resolution. Might be overlapping a little. Even then, piece of paper, a nice flexible piece of plastic, really thin, probably make this happen. Number two, if you've ever thrown a deadbolt rapidly over and over again, I don't know why you would. Okay. So if you ever throw a deadbolt, do it rapidly over and over and over again, and what you're going to feel pretty quickly is that through the key that you're holding, you can actually determine whether or not you've locked or unlocked it. I mean, you can hear it, you can feel it, and maybe you won't have it right the first time, but you just do it a couple of times, and before very long, you will know that you have either unlocked or locked that door. So really, just iterating that throughout all of the locks would have been totally fine, and you would have gotten through it pretty quickly. So here's the solution they came up with. Yeah, so that's a honkin' magnet, the goofiest, like, prop house looking magnet you could get your hands on. So Smarmy Dude has the magnet, and in his hand here, he has a little pouch of metal filings. So he lays the magnet on the door in proximity to the locks, which are probably brass or cast zinc. Keep that in mind. For the sake of argument, we'll say that the bolts are steel, but that's going to be a pretty crazy magnet. And he then applies the filings along a strip of tape so that he can see them, because he has magnetized the bolts, ladies and gentlemen. And so he continues to do this throughout, unlocking, and you see the things fall. And it's really nicely done. Like, if this was an appropriate way to carry this out, this is beautifully filmed. And then he looks so fucking smarmy. That's all I have for you. All right, thank you all so much. I'll be all around the conference. Hit me up. Holler at me, SchuylerTowne.com. Thank you.